So when you think of a Germanic poem, an epic, or whatever, you're going to think of, the stuff written in Old Norse, like the sagas, the Eddas. You're going to think of, something like the Nibelungenlied or Beowulf or something of that sort, right? You're going to think of something in a Germanic language. You're almost certainly not going to think of uh, an epic poem written in Latin. That's exactly what Waltharius is. It is a Germanic epic, I guess, is just a good term for it. We often use poem, but it's written in Latin. So this is actually a version I recently just read. In fact, this is my first time reading Waltharius, though I actually need to read it for a class here soon. But as it says here, the Latin epic of Walter of Aquitaine, translated by Brian Murdoch and Leonard Nydorf. This recently released. This came out in December just last year, so last month, from Uppsala Books. And so that's why I decided to get it. And plus, I like reading stuff like that anyways. So I don't read a lot of stuff strictly in Latin these days. But I mean, if you're a medievalist, it's kind of the thing to do. You're going to have to do it at some point anyways. So this is pretty short, okay, as you can tell. This is not a super long. It's only 1,456 lines in dactylic hexameter, which is the meter they use that is used in Latin epic poetry. But it is about Walter of Aquitaine, so it is a continuation of that classical epic tradition, and also a continuation of this Germanic epic tradition. An interesting mix. So it is about Walter of Aquitaine, who would have been probably a Visigothic hero, though the poem actually has all these characters retain their locales. They actually get the label of the peoples that would have lived there at the time that it was written. Right, so this is probably in the 9th century. This is uncertain. And I'm gonna simplify this, and they go over, or Murdoch goes over some of these problems in his introduction, and he'll explain more in the notes at the end of the book as well. Also, I should mention that there are appended to this 2 smaller Latin poems: King Pepin's victory over the Avar Huns, as well as the battle fought at Fontenay. I don't actually know this, but so we have also Gabicho, who is a Frank here, though he would have historically been a Burgundian. We also have other characters that fall into that as well, right? Right, like Walter of Aquitaine, as opposed to Walter the Visigoth, right? The Visigoths weren't around at this point, so yeah. We're also not really sure who the author is, though it seems that the author was German. This you can kind of tell from the Latin itself, and it's often attributed to someone named Echehard I of St. Gall, though, again, Murdoch talks about why it's not such a straightforward and easy answer. Overall, though, you definitely get a glimpse at the potential origins of this poem and its relation to other works, actually. It's interestingly, as far as like Germanic epics go, it's not tragic. Whether this was for a distaste for Germanic tragedy, as it certainly seems pretty much while you're reading the poem that it's going to end in tragedy. It does seem to fit, though, as Murdoch points out, actually, with the Germanic bridal quests, as this is pretty much the story of Walter killing a bunch of warriors as he flees Attila and the Huns, with Hildegund, his betrothed. So to me, it kind of reads like a go-between of the proper high medieval romances and the earlier Germanic poems, generally labeled as epics. I say earlier, I mean Nibelungenlied's right around this time, and the Old Norse stuff's not written down till later either. But those tend to follow a legendary tradition from stories that were in this past, rather, though. So this is in some ways kind of like the Nibelungenlied, though, actually, as I would say, particularly with the avoidance of tragedy. While the Nibelungenlied itself is tragic, it's appended with the Klage, right? Or Klage, I don't know how to say Klage, I think, which gets rid of that tragic ending, essentially. And so, like, it has a really interesting ending, this does, where everyone pretty much comes out maimed, but the people you're afraid are going to die, well, doesn't quite happen. So I think you should just read it and enjoy it. It's very short. Um, and I think it is often compared in the introduction to Kudrun, which I haven't read, although I'm familiar with the good Gudrun story. So, anyways, but it's short poem. It is bloody. It's intriguing, and it, again, has a wild ending. And it's nice to be able to get this Germanic stuff in the Latin language, which we often get the other way around, right? It's nice to see the mix of them, right? I mean, something I think the Old English to the Phoenix, for example, there's lines at the end of the poem that are written in Latin and in Old English, and they work really well together. But this text itself is something that's actually been largely confined to academia, and has been, well, largely inaccessible to a wider audience, whether that's the mode of translation or just how it's published, essentially. So Uppsala Books is really affordable. This was like $20 in paperback. Um, and the translation is very accessible, very easy to read as far as translation goes. It's not going for anything difficult really. But I mean, looking at the Latin, when I look at the translation, it follows a good job. It's not like it's an untrue or unfaithful translation. So there are other sources for Walter, interestingly enough. This is the most complete, actually. The most complete of the Germanic legend is written in Latin. But he is mentioned actually in a variety of Middle High German texts, most interestingly in the fragments that are left of the epic Walter and Hildegund. And there are also the Old English fragments that survive of Waldera, and a brief relation actually that is told in the Old Norse Thrifix saga. So overall, it's pretty interesting, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot, and I just wanted to put this out there because it seems like it's not very well known. It wasn't really well known to me either. I never hear anyone really talk about it. So, um, and maybe this book will make it a bit more accessible to other people. So, I'd recommend that. You can go to their website or just go to Amazon or whatever. I'm not paid to advertise this, by the way. I like it when stuff is accessible, especially when you have things like, I would argue this is probably the go-to version of Waltharius. But when you look at something like I was looking at with a friend just yesterday, the go-to version for Saxo Grammaticus's History of the Danish People or whatever, it's like $350, right? So like, and that's not accessible. Sorry. So this is much more affordable. So yeah, definitely don't confuse Walter with Harold. That's a terrible joke. Sorry, that's why I left it to the end. But I'm gonna get going now. Thanks for watching. Liam from Liam's Lyceum.